For 7 years, the ranchers of Clearwater Valley bought their horseshoes from a ghost. Every month, a crate would appear at the edge of town, perfectly forged shoes in every size, nails straight and strong, metal worked with a skill that rivaled anything the territory had ever seen. No one knew where they came from. No one saw who delivered them. The crate was simply there at dawn, with a note listing fair prices and a tin box for payment. The blacksmith, old Hector Grubb, swore it was the devil's work. The preacher called it a mystery best left uninvestigated. The ranchers didn't care either way. They just knew the ghost shoes never cracked, never bent, and kept their horses sound through the hardest trails. None of them guessed the truth, that the shoes were forged in a cavern half a mile beneath the mountains by a woman they'd driven out of town for daring to pick up a hammer. Her name was Callie Brennan, and this is the story of how she became the blacksmith they said she could never be. Callie had been born with iron in her blood, or so her father always said. Seamus Brennan was the only blacksmith in Clearwater Valley, a barrel-chested Irishman who'd learned the trade from his father and his father before him, a chain of knowledge stretching back to the old country. He'd wanted sons to carry on the tradition. Instead, he got Callie, a daughter with her mother's dark hair and her father's stubborn jaw, who'd rather watch sparks fly from the anvil than play with dolls. By the time she was 8, Callie could identify every tool in the forge by sound alone. By 12, she was working the bellows with the steady rhythm of a heartbeat, keeping the fire at perfect temperature while her father shaped iron into miracles. By 15, she'd forged her first horseshoe, rough, uneven but functional, and felt something click into place in her soul. "You've got the gift," her father told her, turning the shoe over in his calloused hands. "Same as me, same as your grandfather." "Then teach me properly," Callie said. "Teach me everything." Seamus hesitated. It wasn't done. Women didn't work forges, didn't swing hammers, didn't do the brutal physical labor of shaping metal. But Callie was all he had, and the gift was real. And maybe the old rules didn't apply so far from anywhere that mattered. He taught her. For 3 years, Callie learned the secrets of the forge, how to read the color of heated iron, cherry red for bending, orange for welding, white for the delicate work that separated craftsmen from amateurs, how to calculate the precise number of hammer strikes needed for different thicknesses, how to temper steel so it held an edge without becoming brittle, how to shoe a horse so the animal walked true for months instead of weeks. She learned, and she practiced, and she got good, really good. Then her father died. The accident happened in the spring of 1882, when Callie was 18 years old. Seamus was shoeing a rancher's stallion, a big, nervous animal that should have been sedated but wasn't, because the rancher was cheap and impatient. The horse spooked at a sound from the street, reared, and came down with both front hooves on Seamus Brennan's chest. He died 3 days later, drowning in blood from lungs that had been crushed beyond repair. Callie was at his bedside when he went. His last words were about the forge, about the orders that needed filling, the iron that needed working, the customers who would be waiting. "You can do it," he whispered, his voice wet and failing. "You're better than I was at your age. Don't let them tell you different." "I won't, Da, I promise." He smiled, squeezed her hand, and was gone. Callie buried her father on a Tuesday. On Wednesday, she fired up the forge. The town's reaction was immediate and unanimous. "Absolutely not," said Mayor Whitfield, when Callie applied to take over her father's business license. "A woman running a forge? It's indecent. It's dangerous. It's simply not done." "I've been working that forge for 3 years," Callie said, keeping her voice steady despite the rage building in her chest. "I trained under my father. I can do the work." "I'm sure you believe that, Miss Brennan. But blacksmithing requires strength, endurance, expertise. It's man's work." "Then test me. Give me any job you want. If I can't do it, I'll close the forge." The mayor exchanged glances with the men around him. Garrett Stone, the biggest rancher in the valley, Reverend Michaels, whose opinion shaped half the town's morals, Hector Grubb, the traveling smith who'd been trying to establish himself in the territory for years. The position has already been filled, the mayor said. Mr. Grubb has agreed to take over your father's forge. You may collect your personal belongings by week's end. Callie stared at them. You're giving my father's forge to a stranger? Mr. Grubb is a qualified blacksmith. You are a young woman who should be thinking about marriage and family, not hammers and horseshoes. My father built that forge. He taught me. Your father, God rest him, made an error in judgment. It's not your fault, Miss Brennan, but the error will not be compounded. Hector Grubb had the decency to look uncomfortable, but not uncomfortable enough to speak up. He wanted the forge. He'd been wanting it for years. And now he was going to get it, simply because he was a man and Callie wasn't. She left the mayor's office without another word. That night, she took everything she could carry from the forge that had been her home. Her father's tools, the hammer he'd brought from Ireland, the tongs he'd made himself, the files and punches and chisels that represented a lifetime of accumulated equipment. The anvil was too heavy to move, but she took the smaller swage block, the hardy tools, the measuring instruments. She also took her father's notebooks, decades of accumulated knowledge written in his cramped handwriting, covering everything from metallurgy to horseshoe fitting to the secret techniques he'd learned from his own father. And she took one more thing, a sand-colored dog with amber eyes who'd been her father's companion and was now hers. The dog's name was Ember, for the color of her coat and the sparks she'd grown up around. Callie loaded everything onto her horse, a gray mare named Storm, who her father had shoed himself 3 years ago, and rode out of Clearwater Valley before dawn. She didn't look back. The mountains northwest of the valley were wild country, steep terrain, dense forest, and a maze of canyons that had swallowed prospectors and outlaws for decades. Callie had explored these hills with her father, hunting for iron deposits he'd never had time to properly mine. She remembered one place in particular, a cave system he'd shown her when she was 14, where a vein of iron ore ran through the rock like a dark river frozen in stone. If a man wanted to disappear, her father had said, he could build a whole life in there. Water from the underground stream, iron from the walls, shelter from anything the world could throw at him. Callie hadn't thought about that cave in years. Now she rode toward it like it was the only place left on Earth. She found it on the 3rd day, a narrow opening in a cliff face, hidden by scrub brush and fallen rocks. The passage beyond was tight for the first 50 feet, barely wide enough for Storm to squeeze through, but then it opened into a chamber that took Callie's breath away. The cavern was enormous, at least 100 feet across, with a ceiling that vanished into darkness overhead. A stream ran through one corner, clear and cold, fed by some underground source. And everywhere she looked, she could see the dark veins of iron ore threading through the limestone. Her father had been right. A person could build a whole life in here. Callie unsaddled Storm, let Ember explore the darkness, and began to plan. The first year was construction. Callie had no formal training in building, but she had her father's practicality and a lifetime of watching him solve problems with whatever materials were at hand. She built a forge against one wall of the cavern, using stones from the cave floor and clay from the stream bank. She constructed a bellows from leather she'd brought and wood she harvested from the forest above. She created a chimney system that channeled smoke through natural fissures in the rock, dispersing it so gradually that no one on the surface would ever see it. The hardest part was the anvil. She couldn't bring her father's. Too heavy, too obvious, so she had to make her own. She found a boulder of dense granite, spent 3 months shaping it with hammer and chisel, and finally produced a surface that would serve until she could forge something better. By winter, She had a working forge hidden inside a mountain. By spring, she was making her first horseshoes in her new home. The quality surprised even her. Callie had always been good. Her father had said so, and he wasn't a man for empty praise. But working alone, with no one to impress and no one to judge, she discovered levels of her craft she'd never reached before. She experimented with techniques her father had only mentioned, followed hunches that led to innovations, failed spectacularly, and learned from every failure. The iron from the cave walls was different from commercial stock, purer in some ways, with trace minerals that gave it unusual properties. Callie learned to work with these differences, eventually producing steel that held an edge longer and horseshoes that wore more evenly than anything she'd made before. She also learned to survive. The forest provided game. The stream provided water and fish. She found a hidden valley above the cave where she could keep Storm and, eventually, 2 other horses she'd bought from a trader who didn't ask questions. She grew vegetables in a small garden that got just enough light through a gap in the canyon walls. It was hard. It was lonely. But it was hers. And every month, under cover of darkness, she made a delivery to Clearwater Valley. The first delivery was an experiment. Callie had forged 24 horseshoes, each one perfect, and she needed to know if they'd sell. She crept into town at 3 a.m., left the crate behind the feed store with a note in a tin box, and vanished back into the mountains before anyone stirred. The shoes sold within a day. The payment was in the box when she checked. She made another delivery the next month, and the next, and the next. The ghost shoes became famous throughout the valley. Ranchers swore by them, said they lasted twice as long as Hector Grubb's work, never cracked on rocky trails, kept horses sound through the hardest seasons. No one knew where they came from, but everyone wanted them. Hector Grubb was furious. "It's unfair competition," he complained to anyone who'd listen. "Someone's undercutting my prices with inferior goods." But the goods weren't inferior. Everyone knew it. The ghost shoes were better than anything Grubb had ever made, better than anything Seamus Brennan had made, better than anything the territory had ever seen. Grubb tried to catch the mysterious Smith. He staked out the delivery spot, hired men to watch the roads, even consulted a fortune teller in a desperate attempt to identify his rival. Nothing worked. The shoes kept appearing, the quality kept improving, and his business kept shrinking. Callie watched it all from the shadows, and she smiled. 7 years passed. Callie turned 25 in her underground forge, alone except for Ember and the horses, and the steady rhythm of hammer on steel. She'd built a life in the mountain. Not the life she'd planned, not the life her father had imagined for her, but a life nonetheless. She had regular customers now, ranchers and traders who'd figured out how to leave orders in the tin box and return a week later for their goods. She made horseshoes, yes, but also tools, hinges, nails, knife blades, anything that could be forged and carried down a mountain in the dark. She'd also started teaching herself advanced techniques from books she had delivered from the East, metallurgy texts, engineering manuals, anything that could expand her knowledge. Her father's notebooks had been the foundation. Now, she was building something new. The isolation had changed her. She spoke to Ember more than any human, had developed the kind of self-reliance that came only from years of depending on no one but yourself. She missed human contact sometimes, missed conversation and laughter, and the simple pleasure of being seen. But she didn't miss Clearwater Valley. She didn't miss the men who had taken her father's forge and told her she couldn't do the work she'd been born for. She had proven them wrong. That was enough. Or so she thought until the epidemic came. The sickness arrived in the spring of 1889, carried by a cattle drive from Texas. It hit the horses first, a fever that burned through barns and stables like wildfire, killing animals within days of the first symptoms. Then it jumped to cattle, to mules, to every four-legged creature in the territory. By summer, half the livestock in Clearwater Valley was dead. Callie heard about it from the notes left in her tin box, desperate scrawls from ranchers who needed horseshoes for the few animals they had left, who would pay anything for equipment to keep their surviving stock working. She filled every order she could, but the epidemic had done more than kill animals. It had killed Hector Grubb. The blacksmith had been kicked by a sick horse he was trying to shoe, the same way Callie's father had died 7 years before. The irony was bitter enough to taste, but what followed was worse. With Grubb dead, Clearwater Valley had no blacksmith. The nearest forge was 200 miles away, across mountain passes that were already closing for winter. The ranchers who had surviving horses couldn't shoe them, couldn't repair their equipment, couldn't maintain the metal infrastructure that kept a frontier community alive. And winter was coming. The letter arrived in her tin box on October 1st. It was written in a careful hand she didn't recognize, signed by Mayor Whitfield, the same man who had given her father's forge to Hector Grubb 7 years before. To the unknown Smith, it read, "Our community is in desperate need. We have no blacksmith, no way to prepare for winter, and no hope of survival without help. I don't know who you are or why you've stayed hidden all these years, but I'm asking, begging you to reveal yourself. Whatever your reasons for secrecy, surely they cannot outweigh the lives of the families who will freeze and starve without the tools to survive. We will pay any price. We will offer any guarantee. Please." Callie read the letter 3 times. Then she sat down by her forge and thought about what it would mean to go back. She'd imagined this moment many times over the years. The triumphant return, the shocked faces, the admission that they'd been wrong about her. In her fantasies, she'd savored their humiliation, fed on the vindication she deserved. But sitting in her cave with the mayor's letter in her hands, she didn't feel triumphant. She felt tired. And she thought about the children in that valley. Children who hadn't voted to take her forge away, who hadn't told her women couldn't be blacksmiths, who would suffer and maybe die because the adults had been too proud to ask for help until it was almost too late. "What do you think, Ember?" she asked the old dog, who was graying around the muzzle now, but still watched her with those steady amber eyes. "Do they deserve to freeze?" Ember put her head in Callie's lap and said nothing. "No," Callie answered herself. "They don't. Nobody deserves to freeze, not even the ones who deserve it." She stood, banked her forge, and started packing. She rode into Clearwater Valley on a Sunday morning, leading a pack horse loaded with tools. The town had changed in 7 years. New buildings, new faces, a general air of growth that the epidemic had only temporarily halted. But the forge was the same. The building where her father had worked and died, now sitting cold and silent with Hector Grubb's name still on the sign. Callie dismounted in front of the mayor's office and waited. It took about 30 seconds for someone to recognize her. "My God," said a voice from the general store. "That's Callie Brennan. Seamus's girl? The one who—" "It can't be. She disappeared years ago." Mayor Whitfield emerged from his office, older and grayer, but still carrying the same self-important posture. He stared at Callie like she was a ghost, which in a way she supposed she was. "Miss Brennan," he said uncertainly, "we thought you were dead." "I'm not." "But where have you been? What happened to—" "I've been in the mountains." Callie kept her voice level, letting nothing show. "I've been forging. Every horseshoe you've bought for the last 7 years. The ghost shoes everyone talked about. I made them. In a forge I built myself. With iron, I mined myself. Because you took my father's shop and told me women couldn't do the work." The silence that followed was absolute. "That's impossible," someone said. "Those shoes are the best in the territory." "Yes," Callie said. "They are." Mayor Whitfield opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. You're the ghost smith? I'm the only smith you've got." Callie looked around at the gathered crowd, at the faces she remembered and the ones she didn't, at the ranchers who had bought her work for years without knowing who made it. Your letter said you needed help. I'm here. The question is whether you're willing to accept it from a woman. Another silence. This one stretched longer. Finally, Garrett Stone, the same rancher who'd sat in the mayor's office 7 years ago, pushed through the crowd. He was grayer now, his face weathered by years of hard work, but his eyes were sharp. "Those shoes you made," he said. "My horses have worn them for 6 years. Never had a problem. Best I've ever used." "Thank you. So you can really do the work? Everything a smith needs to do?" "Everything my father could do. More, actually. I've had 7 years to practice." Stone turned to the mayor. "Then what the hell are we standing here for? Winter's coming, and we've got a smithy sitting empty. Give her the damn forge." "But," the mayor sputtered, "it's not proper. It's not proper." Stone's voice cracked like a whip. "My daughter's horse needs shoes. My cattle guard needs repair. My hay rake is missing 3 tines. And you want to talk about proper?" He stepped forward until he was face to face with the mayor. Hector Grubb was proper. Hector Grubb is also dead. This woman kept us in horseshoes for 7 years while we laughed about ghost smiths and devil's work. Give her the forge. The mayor looked around at the crowd, at the nodding heads, the desperate faces, the practical people who cared more about survival than propriety. "Fine," he said finally. "Miss Brennan, the forge is yours, temporarily. Until we can find a proper—" "It's not temporary," Callie interrupted. "It's permanent. Or I ride back into those mountains and you figure out winter on your own." Another long silence. "Permanent," the mayor agreed, defeated. Callie nodded once, gathered Storm's reins, and walked toward her father's forge. The crowd parted to let her through. The first month was chaos. Every rancher in the valley needed work done, and they needed it now. Callie worked 18-hour days, firing the forge before dawn and banking it after midnight, her hammer ringing out a rhythm that the town hadn't heard in months. She showed horses, repaired tools, forged nails and hinges and door latches. She fixed wagon wheels and made hay hooks and created a new design for snow chains that could be fitted to horses' hooves for winter travel. Every skill she'd developed in her mountain forge, every technique she'd taught herself from books and experimentation she put to use. The people of Clearwater Valley watched her work with expressions that shifted from skepticism to surprise to something that looked almost like awe. "She's faster than Grubb was," someone said. "Better, too. Look at that weld. How did she learn all this?" Callie didn't explain. She just worked. And when the first snow fell, and the passes closed, and the valley was sealed off from the outside world, every family had the tools they needed to survive. The vindication she'd imagined didn't feel the way she'd expected. She thought it would be sweet, watching the faces of the men who doubted her, hearing the apologies she deserved, savoring the proof that she'd been right all along. Instead, it felt hollow. 7 years of isolation, 7 years of proving herself to no one but the walls of a cave. And now she was back where she'd started, doing the work she'd always known she could do. What had been the point of all that suffering? She found the answer on a December evening when a young girl appeared at the forge door. The girl was maybe 12 years old, skinny and fierce-eyed, with the look of someone who had already learned that the world didn't give you what you deserved. "I want to learn," she said without preamble. "I want you to teach me." Callie set down her hammer. "Learn what?" "Smithing, forging, what you do. It's hard work, dangerous. You'll burn yourself, cut yourself, smash your fingers. I don't care. Why do you want to learn?" The girl lifted her chin. "Because they say I can't. Because I'm a girl and girls don't do this, but you do it. You're the best smith in the territory and you're a woman." Her voice cracked slightly. "I want to know if I can be like you." Callie looked at this girl, at the fire in her eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw, the desperate hunger for someone to tell her that her dreams were possible. She saw herself at 12, watching her father work, knowing in her bones that this was what she was meant to do. "What's your name?" Callie asked. Sarah Whitfield." "The mayor's daughter?" "Of course." Callie should have turned her away, should have told her to ask her father's permission, to wait until she was older, to come back when she was sure. All the sensible, careful things that adults said to children with impossible dreams. Instead, she picked up a spare hammer and held it out. "First thing you learn," Callie said, "is how to hold this without breaking your wrist. Come on." Sarah's face transformed. She stepped into the forge like she was stepping into a church, reverent, terrified, alive. And Callie understood finally what the point of all that suffering had been. Not vindication, not proof, not the satisfaction of being right. The point was this girl. The point was the next generation of women who would pick up hammers and tongs and not be told they couldn't. The point was knowledge passed on, skills taught, doors opened that had always been closed. "The fire's the heart of everything," Callie said, guiding Sarah to the forge. "You learn to read it like you read a face. The color tells you everything you need to know." Sarah leaned forward, watching the flames with hungry eyes. "Cherry red for bending," Callie continued. "Orange for welding, white for the delicate work. Your father and all those men, they'll tell you this is too hard for you, too dangerous, too much. Don't listen. I didn't listen, and look where I am." "In a forge," Sarah said. "In my forge, the one they tried to take from me." Callie smiled, her first real smile in longer than she could remember. "Someday this might be your forge, or you might build your own somewhere else for reasons of your own. But whatever happens, you'll know the work. You'll have the skills, and no one will be able to tell you that you can't." 20 years later, Callie Brennan stood at the edge of her forge and watched Sarah Whitfield, Sarah Mackenzie now, married with children of her own, demonstrate a welding technique to 3 young apprentices. 2 of them were girls. One was a boy who didn't care that his teachers were women. All 3 watched with the same hungry focus that Sarah had shown that first day, that Callie had felt watching her father, that every true smith recognized in their own kind. Ember was long gone, but her granddaughter lay by the forge, a sand-colored dog with amber eyes who had inherited her grandmother's calm patience and her tolerance for sparks. The forge itself had grown over the years. Callie had expanded it twice, adding a second workspace, a teaching area, storage for the advanced projects she took on now. She'd trained 14 apprentices in 2 decades, 9 of them women, and her former students were working in forges across 5 territories. Mrs. Brennan, one of the apprentices, a girl named Rose, who reminded Callie painfully of her younger self, approached with a horseshoe in her tongs. "Is this ready for quenching?" Callie examined the shoe with practiced eyes. The color was right, the shape was true, the thickness was even. "It's ready," she said. "Good work." Rose beamed and hurried back to the slack tub. Sarah finished her demonstration and walked over, wiping her hands on her apron. At 32, she'd become a master smith in her own right. Technically better than Callie in some ways, though she'd never admit it. "Your father stopped by earlier," Callie said. "Wanted to discuss the order for the new town hall," Sarah snorted. "Let me guess. He wanted to negotiate the price. He wanted to tell me how proud he is of you." Callie smiled at Sarah's surprise. "He's changed, you know. They all have. 20 years is a long time. Not long enough to forget how they treated you. No, but long enough to forgive it." Callie looked around the forge, at the apprentices working, at the fire burning, at the walls that held decades of accumulated tools and knowledge. "Your father gave me back this forge because he was desperate, but he gave you his blessing to learn here because he saw what you could become. That's not nothing." Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you ever regret it? The years in the mountain, I mean. Building alone?" Callie considered the question. "Sometimes," she admitted. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I'd stayed, if I'd fought them directly instead of disappearing. Maybe I could have changed things sooner. Maybe I wouldn't have lost those years. But I learned things in that cave that I never could have learned here. I became the smith I am because I had no one to rely on but myself. And when I came back, she gestured at the forge, at the students, at everything she'd built. I was ready. I was good enough that they couldn't deny me. I was strong enough that they couldn't break me. She thought of her father, of his last words, of the promise she'd made at his bedside. "Don't let them tell you different," she said softly. "That's what my father told me before he died. I didn't let them, and now neither will you. Neither will Rose or any of the others." Sarah put her hand on Callie's shoulder. "Thank you for everything. Don't thank me, just teach the next ones. That's how it works. Knowledge gets passed on, skills get shared, doors get opened. That's the only thing that matters in the end." The forge fire crackled and sparked. The apprentices worked their metal, their hammers ringing out in the rhythm that Callie had first learned 30 years ago, watching her father work, knowing in her bones that this was what she was meant to do. They had told her a woman couldn't be a blacksmith. She had vanished into a mountain and proved them wrong. And now, in a forge filled with students who would carry her knowledge into the future, she was proving something even more important, that no one would ever have to vanish again. The hammer fell. The sparks flew, the fire burned, and Callie Brennan smiled.